He took my life without shouting. No courtroom heard it. The inlet hears everything. Water keeps books better than men. I brought rope, a watch, and the patience he taught me by breaking me. I left Mercy at the dock. When the bell rings, the cut wakes. Foam climbs skin like fingers. Breathing turns to counting. The current does its work. At first light, there will be two paths on the stones. One ends at the bridge. One ends here. Marcus Kellerman had always believed that revenge was a dish best served cold. But as he stood on the rain-slicked dock at Mercy Bay, watching the fog roll in from the Atlantic, he thought maybe it was better served wet. Very wet indeed. The tide was coming in, had been for the past hour, and by his calculations, it would reach full height around midnight. Perfect timing, really. Marcus had always been good with timing. It's what had made him such a successful businessman back when he'd had a business to run, back before Donovan Price had destroyed everything. Now, as he checked his waterproof watch, a Rolex, naturally, though he might not need to worry about keeping time much longer, Marcus allowed himself a thin smile. Donovan was about to learn what it felt like to lose everything that mattered. The fog was thick enough now to swallow sound, which was convenient. Not that anyone would hear much from where Donovan was currently situated. Marcus had chosen the location carefully. A small rocky inlet about a quarter-mile from the main shoreline, accessible only at low tide and completely cut off when the water rose. It was the kind of place where a person could think about their mistakes in perfect solitude, at least until the thinking stopped altogether. Marcus made his way along the treacherous path, his flashlight beam cutting through the murk. The rocks were slippery with seaweed and spray, but he'd walked this route 3 times in the past week, memorizing every step. Preparation had always been his strong suit. It's why his construction company had been the most successful in 3 counties, until Donovan Price had decided to play God with other people's lives. The path curved around a massive boulder, and there he was. Donovan Price sat propped against a barnacle-crusted rock, his expensive suit jacket torn and stained with salt water and blood. His hands were zip-tied behind his back, his legs bound at the ankles. A strip of duct tape covered his mouth, though his eyes were wide and alert above it. Alert and afraid. Good. Fear was exactly what Marcus had been hoping for. "Evening, Don," Marcus said, settling onto a dry rock about 6 feet away. Close enough to converse. Far enough to avoid any desperate lunges. "Sorry I'm a little late. Had to stop by the house. Your house, actually. Hope you don't mind." Donovan made muffled sounds behind the tape, struggling against his restraints. The zip ties held firm. Marcus had tested them thoroughly. Now, Marcus continued, pulling out a thermos and unscrewing the cap, the smell of coffee mixed with the salt air. "No need to get agitated. We have plenty of time to talk." "Well, I have plenty of time." "You?" He checked his watch again. "You have about 2 hours, give or take." He gestured toward the water, which had crept noticeably closer since his arrival. "Beautiful night for it, really. Fog's perfect. Gives us privacy. Tide's running high thanks to the storm system offshore. Everything's working out just the way I planned." Donovan's struggles intensified, and Marcus could see the panic building in his eyes. It was a look Marcus recognized, the same look he'd seen in his own mirror 6 months ago, when he'd realized what Donovan had done to him. "You're wondering how I figured it out, aren't you?" Marcus sipped his coffee, savoring both the warmth and the moment. "Took me a while, I'll admit. At first, I thought it was just bad luck. The permits getting revoked. The safety inspections finding violations that weren't there the week before. The union suddenly deciding my workers needed better contracts. Could have been coincidence." The water was definitely closer now, lapping at rocks that had been dry when Marcus arrived. He estimated another 20 minutes before it reached Donovan's feet. The man was sitting in what would soon become a tidal pool, perfectly positioned for what Marcus had in mind. "But then I hired that private investigator. You remember Tommy Breslin? Used to be a cop before he went private. Smart guy, very thorough. He traced the money, Don. All those bribes you paid, all those palms you greased. Paper trails, electronic transfers, even some recorded conversations. You really should be more careful about who you trust. Donovan's breathing had become rapid and shallow, visible in the cold air as short puffs of vapor. The tape over his mouth bulged and contracted with each panicked breath. The beautiful part, Marcus continued, is that you did it for such a small reason. My bid on the Harbor View project came in lower than yours, so you decided to eliminate the competition. Not through better work or more competitive pricing, mind you. Through sabotage. Through destroying a business that took me 15 years to build. A larger wave rolled in, sending water swirling around the base of the rock where Donovan sat. The man's eyes went wide as the cold Atlantic touched his shoes. "Oh, that's just the beginning," Marcus said. "See, I've been studying these tides for weeks. Fascinating stuff, really. Did you know that water doesn't just rise gradually? It comes in surges, especially during storms. Waves build on waves, and before you know it," he made a rising gesture with his hand. Whoosh! Donovan was making desperate sounds now, thrashing against his bonds hard enough that Marcus worried he might injure himself prematurely. That wouldn't do it all. "The thing is, Don, you didn't just destroy my business. You destroyed my life. My marriage couldn't survive the stress. Ellen filed for divorce last month. My daughter won't return my calls because she's embarrassed by her old man's financial troubles. 23 employees lost their jobs because of what you did. Good people, people with families." Another surge brought the water up past Donovan's ankles. His expensive Italian leather shoes were completely submerged now, and Marcus could see him testing the zip ties again, hoping desperately that the plastic might have weakened. It hadn't. Marcus had used the heavy-duty kind, rated for 200 pounds of tension. "I spent a lot of time thinking about how to handle this," Marcus said, checking his watch again. The tide was moving faster now, just as the charts had predicted. "At first I thought about going to the police with Breslin's evidence, but you'd already paid off half the department, hadn't you? And the statute of limitations on most of what you did is pretty short." The water was at Donovan's knees now, and Marcus could see him shivering. Whether from cold or fear, it was hard to say. Probably both. "Then I considered the direct approach. A gun, a knife, maybe a good old-fashioned beating. But that seemed too quick, and it wouldn't really teach you anything, would it? You'd be dead before you could truly appreciate the lesson." A particularly large wave rolled in, bringing the water up to Donovan's waist. The man's muffled screams grew more frantic, and he began rocking back and forth, trying to topple himself over. Marcus had anticipated this and positioned him perfectly. Even lying on his side, Donovan would still be in the path of the rising water. "This way is better," Marcus continued. "This way you have time to think about what you did. Time to feel what it's like to watch something you can't control destroy everything you care about. In your case, that's your life. For me, it was my livelihood, my family, my future." The water was chest high now and rising faster. Donovan's struggles had become frenzied, but the rocks behind him were too high to climb, even if he could get his hands free. Marcus had tested that too. "You know what the funny part is?" Marcus stood up, finishing the last of his coffee. "I could still save you. Even now, I could cut those zip ties and help you climb up onto the higher rocks. We could both walk away from this." Hope flickered in Donovan's eyes, visible even in the dim light. "But I'm not going to," Marcus said, "because you wouldn't have done it for me. When my business was drowning, when my marriage was falling apart, when my daughter stopped calling, you could have helped then. You could have told the truth, admitted what you'd done, maybe helped me rebuild, but you didn't. You just watched me sink." The water was at Donovan's shoulders now. Another few minutes and it would reach his chin. Marcus began walking away, then stopped and turned back. "Oh, and Don? That evidence Tommy Breslin gathered? I've got copies stored in 3 different locations, with instructions to deliver them to the FBI, the State Attorney General, and the Portland Herald if anything happens to me. So even if you somehow manage to get out of this, you'll have bigger problems waiting for you." That was a lie, of course. Marcus had no intention of surviving the night himself. The evidence would be discovered eventually. He'd left copies in his safe deposit box with a note explaining everything, but by then, it wouldn't matter to either of them. As he walked away, Marcus could hear Donovan's muffled screams growing more desperate. The sound carried strangely in the fog, seeming to come from all directions at once. He forced himself not to look back, not to second-guess what he was doing. Donovan Price had chosen this path when he'd decided to destroy an innocent man's life for profit. Now he was going to experience exactly what that felt like. Marcus made it back to his car, just as the first real scream pierced the night. A sound that somehow carried despite the tape, despite the fog, despite the crash of waves against rock. It was the sound of a man realizing that death was no longer a distant possibility, but an approaching certainty. He sat in the driver's seat for a moment, listening to the fog-muffled sounds from the inlet. The screaming had stopped, but he could hear something else now, a rhythmic slapping sound that might have been waves against rocks, or might have been something else entirely. Marcus started the engine and began driving toward the interstate. He had one more stop to make before this was finished. The Mercy Bay Bridge was about 10 miles north, a high span that crossed the deepest part of the bay. At this time of night, with the fog as thick as it was, there would be no traffic, no witnesses, just a lonely man making a final decision about how his story would end. As he drove, Marcus thought about Ellen, about Sarah, about all the employees who'd lost their jobs because of Donovan's greed. He thought about the house he'd had to sell, the dreams he'd had to abandon, the future that had been stolen from him. He thought about the look in Donovan's eyes when the water had reached his chest. By the time Marcus reached the bridge, the fog was so thick he could barely see the guardrails, perfect conditions for what he had in mind. He parked in the center of the span, got out, and walked to the railing. 200 feet below, the black water of Mercy Bay waited. At high tide, it would be deep enough, more than deep enough. Marcus checked his watch one last time, 12:17 a.m. By now, the tide would have done its work at the inlet. Donovan Price was beyond help, beyond salvation, beyond the reach of anyone's forgiveness or condemnation. Just like Marcus himself, he thought about leaving a note, some final explanation for why he'd chosen this path. But what was the point? The evidence in the safe deposit box would tell the story well enough. Two men who destroyed each other over money and pride, leaving behind nothing but grief and unanswered questions. Marcus climbed onto the guardrail, balancing carefully on the narrow concrete ledge. The fog swirled around him like ghostly fingers, and somewhere in the distance, he thought he could hear the sound of the tide turning. Below him, the dark water called, with promises of peace, of an end to the anger and pain that had consumed him for the past 6 months. It would be quick, quicker than drowning slowly in a tidal pool, certainly, almost merciful by comparison. He thought about Donovan one last time, wondered if the man had understood in his final moments why this had happened to him. Probably not. Men like Donovan Price rarely understood the consequences of their actions until it was too late to matter. Marcus stepped forward into the fog, and for a brief moment he felt something that might have been peace. The water below waited patiently, as it had waited for Donovan, as it would wait for others who thought they could escape the tide of their own making. In Mercy Bay, the fog began to lift just before dawn, revealing an inlet where the rocks were bare and clean, washed smooth by the retreating tide. If anyone had been watching, they might have noticed that the water looked darker than usual, stained with something that caught the early morning light. But nobody was watching, nobody ever did, until it was too late. The tide always claimed what it was owed, in the end. If you enjoyed this video, please do not forget to like, comment, or share this video with your friends. Subscribe to our channel to hear more stories like this one.